So that said, let's talk a little bit about the overall strengths of these teams and the compositions that we saw in the playoffs, because EG is relatively easy to predict in terms of what
They're
they're
probably
doing.
the most like telegraphed of the drafting teams, right?
Right. And the way it goes and the way that I can see these matches going is like overwhelmingly we saw Danny be the hyper carry, right? It was all these compositions typically that EG was building in the playoffs were based around him playing like a Jinx or another huge 80 damage champion.
All the obvious ones,
Yeah, or Zeri. And so they were basically protect the AD compositions,
yes,
where a lot of his teammates were playing more utility champions or, even though we did see some Nocturne coming in, that's more of it's still an enabler because it turns out the lights on the rest of the players and allows Danny to have a lot more space when he's doing these team fights. We saw a lot of kind of mid-fight disruption champions or frontline disruption champions from JoJo, like Rise, who are intended to be tanky and kind of CC and absorb focus during these team fights. And so, one of the big flaws, you would say, with EG's performance is that they frequently gave up 2v2 deaths. This happened a lot, even in games that they were winning. They would kind of randomly die in the laning phase. So the 2v2 overall of Danny and Vulcan has been pretty weak, even though their late game macro and team fighting has been significantly stronger. That's kind of the scaling and team fighting aspect is really where EG was able to overpower their opponents. Now, on the other side of the coin, you're looking at Flacket and Targamas.
One thing to throw in as well, because I want to ask you about this actually for your thoughts on EG in the tournament. One of the things I thought wasn't emphasized enough, because the whole problem with the EG win was it was all about like the NA players or like, wow, yes, Danny and JoJo the future. What people ignored that I thought was way more interesting, dude, was that thing where their whole strategy was just to give up dragons. Like there was something mad where they only took I think it was like less than half the dragons or something mad, right? So remember, everyone claims in the current game it's all about getting to the soul and all. Like, what do you think that implies? Like, are they just doing a totally unorthodox approach? Like, is there something to the logic based on how they drafted and what they were doing? What do you think of that topic?
So this is actually crazy because EG, despite winning,
3-0 on a bunch of people.
They were 3-0ing a bunch of people. They only took 46% of the dragons in playoffs, which is really insane. I think they only, if I'm remembering correctly, they only took one dragon at all against Team Liquid.
I couldn't believe it. I remember they took
two dragons in the finals, one in game 1 and one in game 2 and 0 in, oh no, they did take more in the game. They took 4. They got the soul in the third one. But in the team, or in the, I was thinking about the, which series was I thinking about? Sorry. Yeah, they only took one in each of the first 2 games that they won against Team Liquid. So that was pretty crazy. I think it was the Cloud9 series. Give me a second, guys, to look. Yes, in the Cloud9 series, they took one dragon in a 3-0.
There's obviously like a massive criticism normally in NA. It's like they all just go to the dragon and then the one that doesn't get it watches the other one take it. Like, this is like the one team that's actually doing whatever it wants. Like, if you're not going to go for it, just give it up. But no, you're doing it.
Yeah. They took 2 dragons in the last game, but the point still stands. You're talking about very, very few dragons overall in these series, and they very rarely go for the first dragon. Now, part of this is because their bot lane 2v2 has been weak. So they haven't necessarily had, so either they're dying or they haven't had the push power in kind of scaling lanes that they need in order to take that dragon. But the thing is like once you come online, once your composition starts to come online, you're able just to fight those dragons. So they're not scared to fight at Soul Point or Dragon Soul because they'll have outscaled by that time and they're confident in their team fighting by that stage with the compositions that they run. So it's a risky strategy for sure, but if you are very good at doing it, then it's perfectly viable, and that's what EG has proved.
Also notable that they were obviously one of the teams that when they could took the Ornn. Like, I think if you have Ornn, this obvious comp that doesn't have to take every dragon, you're already getting stats. You just get them in the game,
right?
Stay alive.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically.
Yeah, exactly. So I think when we start to look at some kind of props that we could make or predictions that we could make in these games, if you look at the first one of G2 versus Evil Geniuses and we pull that up, right? Like if we go to exotic odds, you can see that First Blood is pretty overwhelmingly going to be in favor of G2 at 1.65 to 2.17. I wouldn't say overwhelmingly, actually. But if you look at the actual
First Blood and First Tower, for G2,
if you look at the
like
actual, if you look at the actual stats, G2 had 69% First Blood over the course of the LEC playoffs, whereas if we look at the First Blood of Evil Geniuses, it was 28%. So
makes sense.
I think, like, given the way that they play, and especially the deeper into playoffs, you saw Flakked playing more of the Xayah, more of the Misfortune. These are champions that tend to put a lot more pressure in lane. Yeah, Danny played the Xayah too, but part of that was due to bans. Once the Jinx started getting banned out, it clearly wasn't the first choice for EG. Now, whether Jinx will be played on the new patches is a different question. But I think, generally speaking, G2 tends to play more through their bot side in the playoffs, and they like to have the pressure. So with that said, I think G2 being First Blood is... I really like this one, especially at 1.6. And then I think...
Oh, and here's another factor I'll add in as well. If you know the nature of the fact that, like, they've got a lot of inexperienced players on AG and this is their first international competition, it's way more likely they're the ones that start out slow and are a bit safer and don't go for anything crazy. G2's got veterans, like people like Yankos and Caps know you just get in their ass if you can.
Yeah. And so I think for the first reason too, EG very much deprioritized Dragon, so it's only 1.5 for first Dragon to G2. However, we're still, I'll throw 200 DJT on that. And then the first Herald Eye, that's where EG, I think, puts a lot more emphasis overall. So I'll put 200 on the first Herald Eye going over to EG. Because if you look, first Dragon percentage, only 33% for EG, whereas first Dragon percentage was much higher, as we're looking at right now for G2 at 56%. Not a ton, but enough, right? And then Herald percentage, G2 overall, pretty de-emphasized, under 50%. And then Herald percentage for Evil Geniuses was the highest in the LCS playoffs at 69%, because that's just, Inspire tends to farm up early, and they tend to opt into when the dragon starts to be taken, the jungler typically resets. That's usually about when the Herald spawns, and so they tend to focus topside around Impact and Jojo Pion in order to take that Herald. So these are some props that I think are interesting in the first G2 versus EG game. Again, it is very difficult to predict because if the meta has changed dramatically, but I just don't have a lot of confidence in the 2v2ing ability of Vulcan and Danny, and like they were struggling against NA lanes.
Yeah.
And not to say that Flakked and Targamas, like, obviously these are newer players and there could be issues with them on an international stage, but they didn't really seem to show a lot of nerves. And in fact, I think we can say both of them were quite good they stepped up. They overperformed, if anything, in the LEC playoffs based on expectations. And that means that I think that they won't be rattled by, being in Korea in a, crowd environment.
I even think the G2 stats for like how many they were getting in some ways maybe is soft selling it, because remember they were doing that in series. Like they played 2 series against Fnatic and 1 against Rogue. These are BO5s guys. Like they were playing some really good competition and they're still getting most of the dragons. So like to me that implies I would say they're heavily favored for this. I think it's a good prop.
Right. And also
I have a quick question actually. I don't you can check if the odds are going to be good enough for this, but the other one I would have is this. Do you want to do one for T1 then? Because obviously you can do if they're going to take Herald or
Herald first for T1 would probably be just based on the way that T1 plays. It's only 1.207.
There we go then. They've already got ahead of us on that one, right? They arrived before you did. Like,
the crazy ones, you can do. If you want like the Galaxy Brain one, right? You start doing the in-game one, so you start doing like first Dragon plus first Herald Eye. Like the real question becomes like, do we think that in T1's first game versus Saigon Buffalo that they can somehow like get both of those objectives, even though the first spawn is relatively close together? Because there is 1.514 for first Dragon plus first Herald Eye, which T1's macro is so good, I actually think they could do that. I think they could absolutely do that. So maybe we'll have a little fun with that one. Maybe we'll pull that one.